Hmm.
I know we wanted to talk a little bit of Furiosa. So now, by the time this episode goes live, our review of Furiosa, a Mad Max saga,
Yes.
should be available for you to listen to. You can go and check that out on YouTube or on your
Hmm.
podcast app of choice.
Yep.
We wanted to talk about the box office because, of course, once again, it spurred on an insane amount of discourse
The
because it
discourse is
only,
always the same in some ways, isn't it? It's just it's a new movie fueling the
yeah,
trajectory of it.
yeah, absolutely. And I understand on its face, superficially, why people are concerned because Furiosa only grosses $32 million in its opening weekend.
Yeah, and I think it was expected or they were forecasting like 45 or something like
Yeah,
that
so
for the
it
Memorial Day weekend.
underperformed for
Hmm.
sure. And it has a budget of what, like 160, 180, something to that
It's
degree.
somewhere in between that. I think I heard maybe around 168 exactly, but it might even be a little bit
168.
more than that if we take into account marketing costs. And for
Yes.
context, Fury Road was around a $150 million budget. So Furiosa was a slightly more expensive movie, but Fury Road in totality ended up making, I think, 380 million, something like that. So wasn't the biggest of successes, but it still did fairly well for itself, and it did have some legs to carry it through
Mhm.
up, especially up until award season.
Yeah, I do have those numbers. So Mad Max Fury Road ended up grossing domestically
Okay,
153.6, whereas internationally it had 225.8 for a total grand total worldwide of
okay,
$379 million.
gotcha. There it is.
Now, and I think it's also worth noting that its opening weekend was 45, so it
Yeah.
wasn't crazy either. Now that's obviously more than Furiosa.
Hmm.
However, it's not as if it started out like a lot of these Marvel movies tend to do. Like it was like 45 is modest. It had some
Yeah.
legs that ended up getting to close to 380 worldwide. Now, for reasons we talked about in our review of Furiosa, we don't have to regurgitate them here necessarily.
Hmm.
But because of the style of that film, I I don't think it's going to have the legs. I don't think people are going to go and seek that out in theaters, especially at 2 hours and 28 minutes. It
Right.
is not a short film by any stretch of the imagination,
Yeah.
comparatively to Fury Road, which was around the 2 hour mark. So
Was more
it's
immediate. It was a
longer,
straight up action movie. It was more of
straight
an
up
easy
action.
sell. Furiosa is a harder sell.
It is a harder
It
sell.
really is.
It is, and even though I love the film, Brendan loved it as well. Spoiler alert for our review, I guess.
Oh, it's great. Yeah.
We had some great things to say about it. However, it it is hard even for me to be like, look, I could go out there and say I recommend this movie to everybody. I urge everyone to go see it.
Hmm.
I can tell you right now, a lot of the just normal movie going people in my life, I think of my brother or some of my friends here, I know they're not going to go see this. It's
Yeah.
not the kind of action film that Fury Road was, or that even The Fall Guy is. Like
Hmm.
that film at its core, it has this poetic backbone to it that I love. The artful craft of the film is amazing, but
Yeah.
that at 2.5 hours is going to be a big ask, and
I agree.
I just don't see that film having legs, especially in today's market where a lot of these films immediately end up on some sort of streaming
You're
device a few weeks afterwards.
you're talking about the big thing, or at least one of the big things that this whole conversation around box office, whether it be this week, last week, whatever, it all circles back to this audience mentality of when they can actually see these movies, when they choose to see them in their own home. The fact that they don't have to wait that long. And on top of that, too, financially speaking, going to the movies now is kind of a luxury. It is not cheap to go to the movie, and
Nope.
people are recognizing that. There are a lot of people who will wait to rent movies like this off of Amazon Prime for $20 if they have a household of 4 people, because they're still saving money in that regard, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So it makes sense. I perfectly understand that. So I, if anything, Furiosa underperforming at the box office, that doesn't concern me as much as a movie like The Fall Guy underperforming at the box
Yeah.
office. Because
I
while I
agree.
think Furiosa is a much better movie than The Fall Guy is the kind of movie you would expect to be a box office hit.
Hmm.
So we're seeing certain trends here that relate back to the cost of going to the movies, the ease of application of when you can see these movies. It's a much
Hmm.
shorter time span than before.
Hmm.
And on top of that, it's not just Fury Road underperforming. This was one of the worst Memorial Day weekends in like 3 decades, not
Yeah.
including the COVID pandemic, which was
Because
a very
Garfield also underperformed as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
not
So
just Furiosa, just
no,
across the board,
yeah.
everything's underperforming.
Yeah, yeah. So it's emblematic of a bigger issue. It's not a
Yeah,
Furiosa issue.
it's
And let's
not.
also say, Furiosa was still #1 at the box office. It's the
It
first
was.
film in this
Yep.
franchise to achieve that. So
Yeah, pretty
that's
crazy.
at
Yeah.
least a talking point. That's at least a positive thing here. But there are other factors here that are, I think, consistent with some of the failures of past movies
Yeah.
this year uh, that I think are emblematic of a bigger connected issue.
Yeah, I agree. I think where we're at, and I know this is somewhat beating a dead horse, so we don't have to
Hmm.
expound on this too much, but we're right now with the box office, I think in the same place Disney and Pixar were during the pandemic
Yeah.
when they were releasing these films straight to the Disney platform.
Hmm.
Why am I going to take my kids and spend $70 to go see this in theaters when I know I can see this on Disney Plus in just a few weeks?
Yeah.
And that conditioned audiences to simply wait it out. Now,
Yeah.
thankfully, Elemental ended up having a good run, but that was a
Yeah.
lot of the initial talking points. And I think we're simply at that place right now, just broadly speaking, across the board.
I agree.
Because right now, you can rent The Fall Guy. It's not even June yet. You can rent The Fall Guy right now on Amazon Prime.
That is ridiculous. That
You
is
can
so
rent it right now.
ridiculous.
It came out 3 weeks ago. We talked about this, I think, last week with Challengers.
Yeah.
Challengers came out, and 3 weeks later, you could rent that on Amazon Prime. I
Mhm.
don't know if it's because the studios are freaking out and, hey, if we get it to the rental on Amazon or wherever, at least people will spend the $20 to see it there. I
Mhm.
don't know. I don't have those numbers. I don't know what that looks like, but it seems as if they're removing the box office or the theatrical option rather. They're
Mhm.
taking that away pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think
And
they are.
maybe that's working for them. I really don't know. I have
I don't
no
know.
idea what those numbers are like, but it does make you wonder about the long term health of the theater system because
Yeah,
I
and
mean that's it's not a formula for success.
it's okay if you have a few movies that do that. That premiere maybe
Yeah.
I don't know in some month, and then 3 or 4 weeks later they're available to rent. It's okay if that does happen, but you need to balance that out with movies that are actually going to bring people in, like a Dune Part Two. And the reason why Dune Part Two worked was because there was this unspoken narrative around the film that this needed to be seen in a theater. Like this was an event. This was a theatrical experience. Barbenheimer was the same thing. There were grassroots marketing things happening that made people think this is something I need to see now.
Yeah.
And Dune Part Two did something similar. There was a talk
Yeah.
underneath the film and its marketing from Warner Brothers specifically that got people invested. And a lot of movies aren't doing that. But at the same time, I understand why a lot of people aren't going. I have a hard time even myself recommending movies to people because I don't want to tell them, yeah, you go see this movie. You have to shove out $30 to see it, but I want you to go and
Yeah.
see it. It's like
Yeah.
it's hard for me to even justify that reason, even if I think it's something that is absolutely worth seeing.
Yeah.
I think there's another conversation to be had about the the financial restrictions of movie going
Yeah.
nowadays, and that's also part of it too. I understand like the problem there, and that it's hard to solve that issue, but that's also part of this. It really is.
I agree. And I think what's frustrating and disheartening about all of this
Hmm.
now the context has changed since we last spoke about this specifically, what I'm about to lay out.
Okay.
However, I think what's most disheartening is that just a few years ago, hell, we might have even said this last year, just make good movies, people will go.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's applicable anymore, Brendan.
I think
I
we're
think
starting to see
we
the
have
the, the
surpassed
cracks in
that.
that argument.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
man, I really did believe that, perhaps myopically. I really
Mm-hmm.
did believe that if you just made good movies, people would want to go. And when you see the results of Barbie and Oppenheimer, it just gives you all the more credence
Yeah.
to scream that to the heavens.
Yeah.
Now, to your point, there was a lot more that went into Barbenheimer than
Yeah.
just making good movies. There was a whole grassroots campaign, as you
Yeah.
laid out,
Yeah.
and everything that made that special last year. However, what we're seeing now is good movies in theaters and people aren't going. And
Mm-hmm.
again, it's all multifaceted. There's a lot of layers and working components to this. And I think the major culprit is we are conditioning audiences to just wait 3 weeks and you can rent this at home.
Yeah.
And I'd
Yeah.
rather watch this in my apartment or in my house. I have my studio system. I don't have to spend $60 to take my family to see this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's ultimately what is driving this wedge. But it is, I guess, just as a cinephile and as someone who really believed that would be true,
Mm-hmm.
it sucks that
It really
quality
does.
is not at all a factor anymore.
Do
It's
you
not
think?
at all a factor.
Do you think we'll get something this summer that maybe, I don't want to say proves that wrong once again, but at least provides the other side of that where, okay, a good movie finally comes out and people are actually showing up for it. Do you think there's anything from this year that maybe has the potential to do that?
Well, I think Deadpool's going to do well.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think there are two movies that have the potential to do that. Deadpool and Wolverine is one of them. I think the other one is Twisters.
Twist. Yeah, that'll be interesting. I'm
Well,
curious for that one.
I
Yeah.
do wonder, and again, you live in Florida, so it's very different. But if you watch the news domestically at all, there have been a lot
Yeah.
of devastating things happening, whether it
Yeah,
be
the
in
timing is not ideal for sure.
yeah, I mean, full disclosure, as I'm recording this now in Pennsylvania, Eastern Pennsylvania specifically, just a few miles north of us, we had tornado warnings today. It's not out of the realm of possibility that, just broadly speaking, the weather has gotten dangerous.
Yeah.
Will that help the movie? Would that be like the essence of another grassroots marketing campaign flourishing?
Yeah.
Or
Maybe.
will that hurt the movie? It could be another mindset where people think I've experienced this already. I don't need to see a movie to experience it again.
Yeah,
It could be one of the two, I guess.
I think you're always going to have pockets with that when you're talking about a Twisters movie,
Yeah,
because especially if you're releasing it during the summertime.
yeah,
Tornadoes in the United States are a hazard. They always have been. They always will be.
hmm
It's part of the climate here. So I do think you're going to have to deal with that regardless of when, or at least like moving this to next year or any other
yeah.
year. I don't think you're going to alleviate that problem.
No,
The
I just
only way
feel like this, it's been even more diabolical than maybe ever
for
before. So
sure.
maybe that's more top of mind.
Yeah. I mean, because you're right. There have been some pretty hazardous tornadoes in recent weeks for sure.
Yeah,
And it has been all over the news. To your point, does that weirdly provide interest in the movie? It could. It could
might.
help the movie. I don't
Yeah.
know. But I am curious to see how that plays out. That one I hope is a big hit. I do think that there's potential with Bad Boys 4, given the the box office success of the third one.
Hope
Was
so.
that 2 years ago? But that came out in January, and it was also a different time. I wonder if people are similarly going to be willing to wait a few weeks for that to drop on Amazon Prime. I don't
Yeah.
know, but that franchise has been pretty successful, so that one might be able to.
Bad Boys for Life was 4 years ago. Oh my
Was
gosh.
that 4 years
That was
ago?
2020.
Was that 2020?
Yeah.
Oh my God, where does the time go?
I know. You said 2 years ago, and I thought that makes sense. No,
That's
it was
crazy.
twice.
That's crazy. Yeah, I just time. It's a flat circle. It escapes me.
January of 2020.
That's crazy. I do
That was
remember it was
right
early in the
before
year.
that
Okay,
was
so
right before the pandemic
even
started.
that was before the pandemic even hit. So yeah, a
Yeah.
completely different context altogether.
Yeah.
But generally, people love those movies. It's been a
Mhm.
successful franchise.
Right.
That could still buck the trend. I'm curious. The other one, and again, I don't know because it's Pixar, but Inside Out was a massive hit at the time
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
2015. Does that continue here, or is it another Pixar? It's going to start out slow out of the gate, but maybe it picks up steam similar to Elemental. I don't know. That one I'm curious about.
Yeah. I wonder how word of mouth will really help a movie like Inside Out 2 specifically, because I feel like Pixar movies tend to succeed when the reputation carries them. Inside Out was a big success because not only was it good, there was a period where Pixar was kind of dipping in their quality. And then all of a sudden this narrative came out that, oh, this new one, Inside Out, this is actually like the Pixar of old that you remember. And
Yeah.
I think that brought people in. The movie lived up to those words. It lived up to that reputation. Then they passed it along. Elemental, I feel like, is a little bit different. It didn't quite have that initial reputation, but enough audiences saw it and thought, you know what, this is actually really good. I'm going to tell my friends about this. And then
Mhm.
that's what carried it. So if Inside Out 2 is good, I think that's one that has potential to maybe work. I think that's where maybe
Mhm.
your initial argument on just make good movies might carry some weight still.
Yeah.
I think it might most positively affect Inside Out 2 than anything else.
Yeah. The only film coming out this summer that I have any concrete confidence in is Deadpool.
Yeah.
That one I think will do well. The
Me,
rest of these,
yeah.
I genuinely raise us questions. I
Yeah.
really
I don't
don't
know.
know.
I don't know.
And the other one is Horizon. I could see that one being slow out of the gate because it's an epic western,
Mhm.
but good word of mouth, perhaps even Oscar buzz, perhaps starts to get out. I could see that one having
Is
a
yeah.
methodical, slow burn run at the box office where the first week it's
If
very
it
modest, but by
yeah.
the end could be a big hit.
If it gets the right word of mouth from audiences, because I think critically speaking, isn't that movie holding like a 30% on Rotten Tomatoes right now?
Honestly, I don't know. I
I
haven't
think it
even
is.
looked.
I think it's actually, I think, pretty low right now. But
Okay.
again, it's just
Well, there
chapter
you go.
one, so it
Okay,
might be,
so
it's a two-parter as we know. So there might be more to it than that.
and like I'm being optimistic by laying it out that way, right? Where it's like, okay, because I think it's going to be slow out of the gate regardless.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean,
will
if it
those
gets good
legs?
word of
Yeah,
mouth, then yeah, perhaps over time, then that I could see that having a good run. But if it's getting
right.
panned by critics, now that's coming
Mhm.
out of Cannes. So I mean,
It's a different
who's to
audience.
say
Yeah,
it's a different audience? You don't really trust that. We've seen before where films are negatively reviewed there. They come out here, the word is much more positive, and then they become
sure,
a hit.
sure.
So it's not necessarily apples to apples.
Yeah,
Well, so
that's right.
the
That's fair.
jury is still very much out on that. But to your point, if critics don't go for it, then I think that film is dead in the water.
Yeah. Oh, it's unfortunate. I
Yeah,
wanted another big epic like that to succeed. I
yeah,
really do. I miss those kind of films. I really do.
yeah. But at the same time, like I look at some of these big films, it's hard to say what hit and what doesn't because
Hmm.
Dune comes out earlier this year. That's a film that people were anticipating. That film
Yeah,
has done $711 million worldwide. A huge hit.
that was
That one has
almost a
done
billion
well.
dollar movie.
That one has done well.
Yeah.
So why didn't Furiosa hit the same way? Because that's a sequel, if you will, a prequel in that case, to
Hmm.
a film that we equally loved more. In fact, did Fury Road make more money at the box office than the first Dune? Because
Uh,
the
yeah. I
first
don't.
Dune didn't do all that well.
Well, it was also restricted by pandemic
That's
related.
true.
Yeah,
Different
that was that was a,
context.
that was a very specific context there. But I also think, I think of it from a marketing standpoint too. I think Furiosa was not as well marketed as Dune Part Two, because you really had some of those trailers, you had some of the initial word of mouth and everything, but the hype around it didn't feel as revelatory as even when Fury Road came out almost 10 years ago. Like there was the marketing for Fury Road at the time didn't just market a movie; it seemed to suggest something grand and unique, and I don't know if Furiosa did that. Dune Part 2 kind of did. Now, a lot of that was also very off the heels of what Warner Brothers was doing for their own marketing capabilities. I feel like there was a lot going on underneath the hood that made Dune Part 2 a big hit for audiences. Like the freaking popcorn bucket, right? The things going viral, the
Sure.
videos of people
Yeah.
riding sandworms in the movie theater. It's
Yeah.
like little things like that turned it into an event. And Furiosa sadly didn't quite have that. And sometimes I think we need more of that engagement from viewers and audiences to participate in the marketing that help tell people to participate in the experience then. And I'm starting to feel like we need a little bit more of that. Sadly, like I hate to say it,
Mhm.
it's almost like the TikTok generation needs to play a part in marketing movies, which I think is the
Oh
scariest
gosh.
thing ever.
Okay.
But sadly, it has kind of worked for two of these like experiences, Doom
Yeah.
Part 2 and Barbenheimer. Like that's kind of what helped it in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I don't know if that's TikTok exclusively, but there is
No,
something
yeah,
about social media generation
yeah,
and capturing excitement that has helped some of these movies for sure.
mhm,
And maybe that simply comes down to the kind of movie that Furiosa really is, which
maybe.
is slightly altered to the marketing for sure, as we talk
Hmm.
about in our review.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's part of it or not,
yeah,
but
not sure.
we haven't seen people dressed up as Furiosa riding sandworms in the theater, to your point. That has
Hmm.
not been going viral, but people have been talking about Furiosa on social media. There's been a
Yeah,
lot of virality or semi virality discourse to Furiosa. People are talking about it. There is
hmm,
discussion being had. It isn't translating though to people going to the theaters quite yet.
right.
Hopefully there are legs there. I really do hope that in a couple of weeks time we look back at this and go, we were silly to be worried.
I really hope we have that happen. I really do.
Really do want that to be
I want to be proven wrong. I really do.
I
I want
do
to,
as well.
and it's not just because I want to see Furiosa succeed. I want to see summer movies leave stamps. I
Yeah,
want to see the event
I
like
agree.
mentality come back.
I agree, which brings us to the last point before we get to our best picture series, where Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos this last week insisted that Oppenheimer and Barbie would have done just as well on Netflix, would have had just as big of an audience, which
I can't even
is
react to that. Silly goose.
one of the dumbest things I think I've ever heard in my life.
I think he said, quote, "There's no reason to believe that the movie itself is better in any size of screen for all people," and goes on to say, "My son's an editor. He watched Lawrence of Arabia on his phone." Like that last statement there just completely disregards any credibility.
Yeah, I mean,
It just proves the disconnect of this modern movie going generation from what movies are still trying to do. Like all of
yeah,
a sudden now we're getting conflicting messages here because the studios are still pushing for the theatrical experience. And then you get the
yeah,
head of Netflix who's trying to argue for a completely antithetical thing. And
yeah.
that lack of synergy
I know.
is
Like
is a
he is.
huge problem.
It is actively undermining the theatrical experience.
Mhm.
And look, I understand that iPhones these days are really great. The cameras in them are exquisite.
Yeah.
The visuals do pop on an iPhone, but the screen is also extremely tiny. Like, that's
It's the
not how
size of a
movies
hand.
are meant to be watched or experienced.
Yeah.
Watching Lawrence of Arabia on your phone, I don't even know why I'm having this discussion. I am obviously preaching to the choir here. Yeah,
Yeah,
like we
yeah,
all recognize that is the dumbest thing that anyone could say. And obviously he's going to be a champion for Netflix, but it is extremely depressing, that sentiment that he laid out there. And also,
yeah.
and I believe this was made a pretty significant topic in the conversation when all of this was brought up last week. But,
Yeah.
you know, we just got done talking about how Furiosa was, you know, it underperformed at the box office. A little disappointing in terms of the financial response
Right.
thus far. How many tweets, how much sentiment did you get for Furiosa versus, let's say, Atlas, which was the #1 movie on Netflix over the week?
I forgot that movie was even out.
Like nobody mentioned anything about Atlas other than it was either terrible or there were references to some of the marketing, like an interview where
Mhm.
some dipshit reporter was asking about the Ben Affleck J-Lo divorce rumors.
Mhm.
That's what was brought up. It wasn't the movie itself. It was a moment in an interview where a reviewer, or not a reviewer, an interviewer got out of hand.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he should have been shut down, and he was. But that's it. Like
That's it. That's all.
that's the only thing you heard about that movie. Nobody talked about the film itself. And there was a lot of discussion around Furiosa.
Yeah, there was.
I mean, the theatrical platform simply has more of a cultural pull, even when films are, you know, not financially as viable as you would hope they would be.
Yeah,
Again, it's early for Furiosa, but
it is. It is.
still, I mean, there was much more talk about that than anything Netflix put out over the weekend.
Well, maybe that'll be the legs for Furiosa, that there is still talk about it. But yeah, to your point earlier, this movie Atlas, I'm not being like tongue in cheek or hyperbolic when I say this. I genuinely didn't even know that that was already out. I had no
Yeah,
idea.
yeah,
There was nothing to confirm that for me. Even if I went on Netflix, I didn't even see it. My algorithm didn't even point it out to me. So,
yeah.
like that just completely disregards the whole concept that Ted is talking about here. It makes no sense.
Yes. So I'm sure this is going to be an ever expanding and always evolving conversation. I think we'll leave
Frustrating
it there
one.
for now. Hopefully we don't have to talk about this too much over the next few weeks. I'm sure, although I'm sure it probably
We'll
will.
find more avenues to talk about it. It's going to be like your soapbox about turning art into sports. It's going to be a
Hmm.
box office side of that as well.
Hmm.
We're going to have to make another new T-shirt design
Yeah,
about
unfortunately.
box office numbers. We're going to have to.